Well, hello. It is that time. It's 12 o'clock. Looking forward to talking to you today and seeing how things are going. Obviously, today's topic is company culture. What is it? How do you create it? There's also going to be some fun legal updates that have recently happened in Arizona and a little more around the area globally here. So that is my dog in the background. She will be barking at times, so I apologize in advance. But looking forward to having a good, a good webinar today. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share. If I can accomplish that here. Let me see. All right. So again, looking forward to talking with you today. Let's jump right into it. Why don't we? Always, we're legal, lawyers love disclaimers. So just know that what I'm giving you today is for general purposes. If you have specific legal questions, let me know so I can dive into those facts. But this is going to be generally applied to everybody. All right, first legal update. Recently signed into law by Governor Ducey, it was passed through the House and the Senate in Arizona, was some protection for these type of pandemic situations for businesses. What would happen is the governor and the legislature said, hey, if a business is trying to do its best to protect its employees, we just want to make sure that they're protected against either frivolous or things that could be frivolous lawsuits. So what you have here is this is in the event of a public health pandemic, and it has to be declared as a state of emergency by Governor Ducey or the next governor, whoever it is. This is not specific to COVID alone. It's actually specific to pandemics. So if the pandemic happens again, this would also apply. If the company acted in good faith, and that good faith is evidenced by the person or provider adopting and implementing reasonable policies. That's a fun legal word you'll see a lot. Reasonable policies related to the public health pandemic. What's reasonable is always a question of fact, and so those often go to a jury. Juries decide facts, judges decide law. So what's reasonable or not? Now in this event, if you had in fact put into place a policy as to how you're going to treat people with the pandemic, the social distancing that was required by the CDC, the mask wearing that was going to be that was required in many places by city ordinance. Those all likely would have been reasonable things to abide by. Now, again, I like it because this law doesn't narrowly niche itself into just one practice, one type of business. It actually applies to many. They have almost 10 subcategories, but the one that I like the most, because I think it covers, frankly, almost everybody, every business owner, any business that, and it actually says person can be defined broadly to mean business as well. Person who furnishes consumer or business goods or services or entertainment. So if you think about your business, do I provide a good, a service, or entertainment? And if you try to think of any businesses that fall outside of that, I can't think of many or any at this moment. So again, this is supposed to apply to all for future pandemics and even current. If let's say the new strain of coronavirus pops up, hey, now we know what we need to do to protect ourselves from liability as a business owner. So that's good news. Next up, this doesn't maybe affect you directly, but it's something of note is Arizona has expanded its licenses for betting. So a lot of the public, not public, but the larger sports facilities, think the Phoenix Suns, the Arizona Cardinals, any facility that has 10,000 or more fans that they can fit into a stadium is eligible to receive, there's only 10 of these licenses that are going to be allowed, but are eligible to receive a gambling license. So essentially, you can go to the games, you can bet at the games, and also there's going to be an e-form of betting. So on your phones, as you go to these games. So it's a big difference from what the law used to be. It used to be very restrictive in how and when you could bet. Obviously, things have changed a lot in the last 10 years with betting laws. And obviously, there's sports teams in Las Vegas. And so a lot has changed, and this was just a little interesting side note to things that have been going on. You might have seen in our monthly newsletter that we send out is Netflix is going to start cracking down on people that are using one account for multiple people not in the same household. The difficulty Netflix has had up to this point is frankly, how do you track that? Whose account is it? If they're on vacation, they're going to be able to use that account. They've started to produce or create some abilities to track those things. And what they want to do is start soft and say, hey, If you, it says here, I'll actually read it. If you don't live with the owner of this account, you need your own account to keep watching. So that'll be the first prompt, and then after that, you can start to think about back in the early 2000s, if you remember some of those music companies or music providers that were allowing people to download stuff for free. They start going after end users because it's very difficult it just puts a lot of compliance into place. If end users know, hey, I might have a $10,000, $20,000 fine or penalty if I start using this product inappropriately. So look forward to that coming soon to us all. Lastly, my team, we do a lot of trademark copyright law. One of the big things that just happened, unfortunately, I'd say, but maybe fortunately, Google won a 10-year prolonged litigation. It was with a company called Oracle, who had created some code that was copyrighted as Google used it for some of its operating platform for the Android. I say unfortunately because Google seems to be in some ways exempt from the law in the sense of they are just such a behemoth of power. They're actually, in some ways, they're above the law, right? They aren't jurisdictional. They're not subject just to United States law or any other country. So there's a lot of issues with that. But this one, I don't have a particular dog in the game. It just the court found that there was this caveat called the fair use doctrine that they thought could apply to this situation. Another couple that happened more recently, but not as recent as the Google was, if you're looking at registering a trademark, I tell everybody that we work with, trademarks are the new land. Acquiring trademarks is something that can be very useful and lucrative, but also it protects your brand, right? That's the purpose of a trademark, is to ensure that your goods or services are identified and not solely by others. And so with this, one of the issues that happens with trademarks a lot is if the word is generic, like the word booking in this case, it can't be trademarked. Too many people use it, it's too common. But the Supreme Court last year decided, hey, if you put the .com after that, booking.com, that can be trademarked. And that was that's a big deal for trademark rulings, because if I use the word booking.com or booking, have I now infringed on booking.com in some way, shape, or form? Lastly, and this is more to the common everyday person, some people don't have trademarks for their goods or services. Maybe it's not a big company. What's happened is it used to be there was some leaning towards, hey, if you did willfully infringe on somebody else's trademark, we're not going to penalize you as heavily. Well, the Supreme Court last year said, nope, the law doesn't ever say that it has to be a willful violation. So let's say you start a company and it has a name that you didn't know was trademarked by somebody else and they're using it in a different state. They come out and say, hey, you're using our trademark name. You say, I didn't know about it. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. The penalties are going to be the same whether you knew or could have known about it versus whether you intentionally did something. So good things to know on the trademark side. Now, what we've all been looking forward to is company culture. What is company culture? And the first thing I thought of, one of the reasons I find this so important is, for me, one, I'm running a company, I run a business. I want to make sure my company culture is intact and it's good. Secondly, we do business and employment law. We almost deal with this question every day in one way, shape, or form or another, because people are all trying to make sure their company culture is good, or they're dealing with the fallout of a company culture that might not have been as productive as they'd like it to be. So how do we make sure our company culture is what we want it to be? The first question you have to ask is, well, what is your company culture, right? Sometimes it's hard to pinpoint. It's almost like asking yourself, what are my strengths and weaknesses? Sometimes you need an outside perspective to come in to review and look at things and say, well, I see these things are part of your culture, these things aren't. And sometimes that's a very hard analysis to make because it's personal. It is it's an identity for most of us small business owners. Your company culture is not much different from who you are as a person, right? So it's almost a very personal thing. Now, do you have to be like the big tech companies? You hear all these stories. Oh, Google did this. They let their people show up in jeans and a t-shirt. They don't have to, they have unlimited PTO. They have a break room that's got all this soda you could want, whatever, right? All these things. And some of those things are things you can incorporate. But frankly, some of those are just a matter of money, right? There's Google and other big tech companies have not unlimited money, but far greater than most of us. So you're not going to be able to incorporate some of those same things. But do you really want to? Are you trying to attract the same type of talent that Google is, the same type of personality? Probably not. Maybe in some ways, but probably not. One other thing that I think we fall into the trap of is this: does culture create itself? And in a sense, yes, it does. But I'm a big sports fan, and I always think back to, you look at some of these sports teams that make things look so easy. You think about, I'm a Phoenix Suns fan. You look at the San Antonio Spurs, which we all dislike, or you think about the New England, Tom Brady era with Bill Belichick, and you see the end result of good culture, but a lot of us don't know what those steps are that created that culture. And as you look to it, it's actually very, very methodical. There's been a very deliberate approach to how do I create the right culture? How do I create the right people to fit this culture? There's all those things behind the scenes. So in a sense, a bad culture can very easily create itself. Yes. A good culture, though, takes active thought and process to do. And we'll talk through some of the legal things that you can do to make a culture a productive culture. Lastly, obviously, well, two things. Can you create a culture that is different from you? That again is a difficult thing. If you are the one running the business, kind of manning the operations, the bringing in clients, all the other things, that can be a difficult thing. But bringing in somebody outside that can help facilitate a different culture is something that I've recently done. I hired a chief operating officer for my team and a growth strategist, and it's been incredible to see some of the things that we've been able to accomplish just by bringing in and introducing a different viewpoint, bringing in and introducing somebody who has no direct skin in the game from startup to now where we're at, and just says, okay, let me evaluate where you are now, and let's move forward from there. So again, I think sometimes outside help is needed. Lastly, do the people you hire impact your culture? I think the answer is that's a rhetorical question. Of course, yes. But there are things that you can do to train people up to create a better culture. So what are some of the things, what are the elements that we see on a day-to-day basis that make a company have a good culture or not so good culture? The next slide we get to, well, why is it even important? And again, some of those answers are rhetorical, but some aren't. Some are things that you think, oh wow, I didn't actually know that would be such a big impact. So what are the elements of a good company culture? Clear expectations for performance and pay. Most employees, they want to know, okay, what is it that I'm trying to or being required to accomplish, and what is it that I will be paid for that? It doesn't always have to be a huge bonus structure. It doesn't always have to be a huge pay amount, but knowledge of what is expected is a big component to a good company culture. Second, structured flexibility for work. We hear this term thrown around: flexible workplace, flexible work environment. All these words get used, flexible, but they miss the first word to that, which is structured flexibility. People don't want unstructured, do whatever you want flexibility. Because again, you go back to, well, then what is expected of me? What am I trying to accomplish? Is it reasonable? If I'm trying to accomplish that, can I measure myself against those accomplishments and perform well or perform poorly? So when I say structured flexibility, that one goes more directly to how do you create an environment that is, hey, what is it that I need to get done? But how do I have flexibility to do that in the way that makes best for me, makes most sense for me as an employee? Some people have, again, with the pandemic, had to work from home a little bit more. Is that a big deal? In some cases, not. In some cases, yes, depending on the job, depending on the expectations of performance and pay. So next, outline paths to success. Most people don't show up to a job and think, hey, I want to stay in the same position forever, or I want to stay stagnant. I want to just go in and be almost like back in the 1930s and 40s when you're making Ford vehicles. I want to just tighten this screw over and over and over again for the rest of my life. No, we want to see what paths are available for progression as employees. Positive and safe environment. This one kind of is the generic. It's a no-brainer. It's one of those that you think, well, no duh. But this is where we get into a deliberate practice of how do you create this positive and safe environment. Safe goes towards physical safety. You think of threats from the outside, but also threats from people in the organization, whether it's a sexual advance, feeling like you've been targeted for one reason or another, discriminatory or not, and feeling like you're just not safe to go to work. We get calls daily about people some that have legitimate legal claims, and others that just say, I don't feel safe when I go to work. That's a shocking thing. I mean, to think about. Safety meaning mental, physical, all the types of safety you can think of. And then lastly, consistency. Consistency here doesn't mean you can't change, doesn't mean you can't evolve as an organization, but how you change, how you evolve, how the decisions you make go out, what the people understand as their expectations. It has to be a very consistent expectation. And again, everything I just outlined to you as I was going through preparing this, I thought, oh my gosh, that's the San Antonio Spurs, right? Everything that I just talked about is the things that they did, or in a sports analogy, the previous New England Patriots, the culture that they created was all these things. All right, so why is that important? Oh, nope, we're going to legal tools first. Sorry about that. Legal tools that can help. Again, as we get to think about deliberate practices and procedures, what we're trying to do, the things that we do from the legal tools end can actually be a very useful piece to getting a good company culture. Now, I will say this, form does not always equal substance. What I'm talking about here is form. Form can help you facilitate substance, meaning a good culture, but form alone will not create substance, a good culture. Forms here are the legal tools. Forms such as a good offer letter. Think about the first, date, first interaction you had with somebody, whatever it was. If you have an impression that it's either, it's a lasting impression, whatever it is. Here, the offer letter is typically outside the job description. If you did a post for hire on the internet or wherever you found them, it's the first interaction that you're going to have with people, and it needs to be understood. Hey, this is what our workplace is like. In those, I often like to see a friendly, kind demeanor, right, in an offer letter, but also, hey, your job is contingent upon meeting certain requirements. Your job duties are expected to be X, Y, Z. That way, the person comes into a position and a culture knowing, hey, there are expectations here, and I need to understand and live up to those expectations. So that's the number one. Offer letter sets that. The new hire packet is similar to that. Are you going to require background screening, drug testing? Do you have other policies? We have what's called our copper rules. We have 6 rules in our company. That is part of our new hire packet. If you want to call it a motto or slogan, that is what we do. It sets a very early precedent that says, hey, these are the 6 things that we expect from everybody. And it's like the golden rules, right? A play on the golden rules. So it's more of a, how do you interact with each other as employees? How do you interact with our clients? These are general expectations. So again, the new hire packet is critical. I see far too often where the new hire packet consists of, hopefully, but consists of an I-9 that's never properly filled out and the tax forms, and that's it. And all that says to the person is, hey, if you show up, you might get paid. And that's just not enough to establish a good culture. So new hire packet. Part of that could be an employment agreement. A lot of people don't know what that all entails, but an employment agreement should have at its core expectations as to restrictive covenants, non-compete, non-solicitation of clients, anti-piracy of employees or independent contractors, non-disclosure agreement, and it maybe should have additional things. If they are utilizing your logo or insignia on anything, a licensing agreement. If they are expected to be on social media, your specific social media policy. If they are going to be creative at all or create new products, a work for hire piece, which is, hey, anything that you create while you're with us is ours. We'll work together. We can collaborate on those ideas. So all those things, again, create this kind of definitive culture that you can then show, hey, yes, we like to have fun. Yes, we like to be nice. Yes, all these things, but also we have a backbone to our system. Now, that's the employment agreement. The employee handbook is where I like to get into more of the employee, I don't want to call it employee friendly necessarily, but it gets into, hey, here's some things that we do for you. Employment agreement is more, here's some things that we need you to do for us. So employee handbook says, hey, these are the expectations for safety in the workplace. It usually outlines your Equal Employment Opportunity Commission policy. If somebody discriminates against you, if somebody makes a threat towards you, how do you handle that? We want to make sure you're safe. What is your PTO policy? How can people utilize the PTO here at the workplace? Again, I think that's very helpful to let people know, hey, we do have a very favorable PTO policy. If you want to utilize it, here's what we request. For my team, it's, hey, we don't have a definitive period of time that you need to request in advance, but what we do need from you is to make sure what you are trying to accomplish in that time frame can be covered or is done. And what we found is people are more willing to, hey, I talked to Bob. We don't have a Bob in my office, but I talked to Bob, and he's going to be able to cover for me on these things, so we're going to be good. All right, great. That's great. We'd love to have you take vacation. We want to make sure you're happy and everything goes well there. So employee handbook does those things. It also can outline if you have a more robust social media policy for everybody, even things that don't apply directly to when they're at work. What can you say? What can you do? Things of those nature all should be outlined in the employee handbook. Any employee benefits. So if you offer any health insurance or things like that, they can be detailed or outlined in that document. So again, employee handbook is more, hey, here's what we can do for you. Your PTO policy should be in there, but if it's not, you can have a standalone PTO policy. Again, I find that to be one of those things that really people grasp onto as part of your culture in a company. What is your PTO policy? So think very carefully when you're putting together your PTO policy, what things you should offer, what you shouldn't. Remember that Arizona has a mandatory Arizona paid sick leave law that requires either 24 or 40 hours of paid sick leave in a year that a person can accrue and use. So if that's part of what you're trying to implement into your PTO, do you want that as a separate portion, or do you want to put that all together as one? Those are things that we talk through all the time. One thing that, again, next to company culture, you're only as good as your leaders, right? And a lot of us are our own leaders for our teams. But some of us are bigger, we're growing. You actually have leaders, office managers, people who interact, who supervise. They have a different personality than you do. So when you were a small company, your company culture might have been embodied by you and how you interacted with people. Each step you move forward and you have other people involved, you have new people that have different cultures to themselves. So again, having a definitive culture is key, but also training those supervisors and managers on culture is key as well. We do these trainings all the time where we go in and say, hey, these are the things that are expected of you as a supervisor and trainer. Here's what you should know, that if somebody comes to you with an issue, this is how we handle it. It's funny how some people, just generally, some people react to being asked a question or feel like they're being threatened in their job versus other people who don't feel threatened at all by a comment or question by somebody who's an employee. Disciplinary forms have found this to be a very interesting way to enforce company culture. A lot of people lean away from it because if you don't have the other tools in place we've already talked about, the employee handbook, the employment agreement, it's very hard to measure somebody's performance. It's usually very subjective. Hey, I just don't feel like you're doing a good job. So when you're trying to write a disciplinary form and it's a subjective evaluation, it's very difficult to do so. But as you start to create a more definitive company culture that has clear objectives, you have clear expectations of people, guess what? Those disciplinary forms are actually very useful as a form to enforce this, company culture, as well as it is a huge mitigator of litigation on the back end. When you get people that have issues, usually they see the writing on the wall, and they can feel that, hey, this isn't going very well. So what happens a lot of times is, well, I start to feel anxiety or depression, therefore I go to my doctor, I get a reasonable accommodation note, and now my employer has to deal with this reasonable accommodation under the American with Disabilities Act, or hey, I felt like I've been discriminated against based on whatever gender, whatever it is, right? So it can create a lot of issues if you don't have these disciplinary measures that have been in place from that beginning point up and through the time that you're going to terminate somebody. Because if you start doing discipline after somebody raises a discrimination claim, it looks like you're retaliating. Okay, so yearly reviews, again, we get back to the measurable goals. People want that consistency in the workplace. They want to see what options they have available to them to succeed and grow. And one of those ways you do it is the yearly review. And I've already talked to you about the team motto or slogan. We implement that from the very beginning in Copper Canyon Law. We have 6 criteria that everybody knows and we go over regularly so that people are on the same page. All right. So what happens if you don't have company culture? Before today, I was preparing for this, and I went through a slew of EEOC settlements, top 10 verdicts in the last year over different practices and procedures, things that have happened. And I thought about throwing those up here and talking to you about those. But really, I think that's that's part of the angle, but really the angle is know that just like in any relationship, where people aren't happy in a culture, there's more friction, there's more litigation, there's more issues. So what we've seen most often is when there's not a very strong culture, you have maybe a bad supervisor, or maybe your entire organization has some bad culture to it, there's a lot more friction and likely a lot more litigation that stems from that. So that's number one. Number two is the higher turnover. Obviously, I've talked to several people recently who were telling me, "Hey, um, you know, my workplace is not up to par." And I've talked to many people, and they're all feeling the same way, and they're all ready to leave. And obviously, as an organization, one of your best values or assets is your people. So high turnover creates a lot more overhead, cost, and lost traction with clients. So again, that's a big one. Loss of productivity. I wasn't even thinking of it in the sense of clients, but now that I say that, it makes sense. I was thinking of it from a study I just read. It says that in a good culture, employees are 13% more productive. In a bad culture, they're 10% less productive than baseline. So it's not a 3% or 13% swing. It's actually a 23% swing in productivity from the baseline. If it's a good culture, 13% up. In a bad culture, 10% down. So again, that's a big issue that comes up. Obviously, as a business owner, I understand this too. When you have people that are not happy in your workplace, it's a huge stress. It's a huge thing that you're trying to manage that among all the other things you're doing, and so it can create a big burden on you. So those are the reasons you do it. Those are the reasons you put the form, the tools, the legal tools in place to make sure you have the baseline for a good structure, good culture. But the substance is something that you have to actually generate by doing. So those are the concepts on the foundational level of a good company culture. We deal with this, like I said, almost every day. People call in and say, "Hey, I've got this employee issue, and I don't know how to handle it." And really, what we try to do is we take that from the top and then we go all the way to the bottom. All right, so the employee said that they don't that this is the issue. Well, let's go back 3 steps. What is it that our current practices are? What are we doing here? What are we doing there? And that's the way we found to be most effective in solving or long-term resolving the employee issues that happen for employers. So with that, I really appreciate your time today. These are meant to be short. Some webinars I know are very long. This will likely be the last webinar where we do just me talking. I'm going to be starting to host some people to come on and share different points and viewpoints. I do appreciate you jumping on today. I want to open it up for questions. I'm going to stop the screen share. I'll open up for questions, and if there's any questions, I'll answer them here. And if not, if you have specific questions to you, obviously look at your the email here or give us a call here on the line there. So thank you very much.